Who is Socrates? Do we really know about him?
Socrates is perhaps the most difficult person to understand in the entire history of philosophy. We know a lot about some people, and we know very little about some people. But the uncertainty about Socrates is whether we know a lot about him, or a little. He never wrote a single line. But he was one of the few philosophers who had the greatest influence on European thought. He was an Athenian. He spent his time debating. He taught philosophy to the youth. But no fees were charged. Apart from that, he spent hours in thought. He was considered incomprehensible even during his lifetime. With his death, he came to be regarded as the founder of many different philosophical methods of thought. We learn about Socrates mainly from the writings of Plato and Xenophon. Both were disciples of Socrates. These two disciples wrote a lot about him. But they said very different things. Plato wrote a number of dramatized discussions and dialogues on philosophy. He used Socrates as the main character in them and the one who expresses his ideas. Since Plato expressed his philosophy through the mouth of Socrates, we cannot say for sure whether the things Socrates said in the dialogues were actually what he said. Because of this, it is not easy to identify Socrates' teachings and Plato's philosophy separately. Many other historical figures who have not written about their activities have exactly the same problem. So what the historical Socrates actually said remains a mystery to us. For many years it was Socrates, as reflected by Plato, who inspired thinkers in the Western world.
What is the most famous method of teaching of Socrates?
The basic characteristic of Socrates' art is that he does not pretend to instruct people. So instead of lecturing like a traditional teacher, he discussed. It is called the Socratic method. The Socratic method is named after Greek philosopher Socrates, who taught students by asking question after question. The method is still popular in legal classrooms today. The Socratic method involves a shared dialogue between teacher and students. The teacher leads by posing thought-provoking questions. Students actively engage by asking questions of their own. Socrates wanted students to reach their own conclusions and find answers themselves rather than relying on their teacher for all their knowledge.
What is Socrates' midwifery method?
Socrates' mother was a midwife. He used to say that his art is like the art of a midwife. A midwife does not herself give birth to the child, but she is there to help during its delivery. Socrates saw a similarity between his work and that of a midwife. He saw his task as helping people to give birth to correct insight, since real understanding must come from within. This process of unpacking the truth within was like that of a midwife helping a mother in labor bring forth her child. That was why he called himself the midwife of ideas. In one of Plato's dialogues, Socrates applies maieutikos to his method of bringing forth new ideas by reasoning and dialogue. Maieutic comes from maieutikos, the Greek word for of midwifery. A teacher who uses maieutic methods can be thought of as an intellectual midwife who assists students in bringing forth ideas and conceptions previously latent in their minds.
Why is it called Socrates' irony?
Socratic irony occurs when a person pretends to be ignorant to entice others to admit to knowing or doing something. A means by which the pretended ignorance of a skillful questioner leads the person answering to expose his or her own ignorance. It's sometimes referred to as playing dumb. The person being ironic knows the truth but is acting like they are pretending not to know it in order to make a point. When you ask someone's opinion on something and then they answer your question as if they had no idea what you were talking about. If they understand it correctly, they will say, "I don't know." Socrates, on whom Plato's dialogue centered, was in the habit of pretending to know much less than he actually did. Socrates employed this method of questioning not to make his companions look foolish, but rather as a means of directing people on their own paths to the truth.
What did Xenophon write about Socrates?
Born around 430 BCE and dying around 354 BCE, Xenophon did indeed become a follower of Socrates. Xenophon was a Greek philosopher, soldier, historian, memoirist, and the author of numerous practical treatises on subjects ranging from horsemanship to taxation. Xenophon wrote 4 books about Socrates. Those are the Memorabilia, the Economicus, the Symposium, and the Apology of Socrates. The Platonic Socrates usually converses with the best and the brightest, while Xenophon's Socrates almost always talks with ordinary folk. These books were written by Xenophon to defend the memory of Socrates. Xenophon was pained at accusing Socrates of being irreligious and corrupting the Athenian youth. He argued that Socrates was not so, but a person who was eminently holy, and who brought about extremely good results to those who were influenced by him. The Apology of Socrates is a short speech explaining why Socrates preferred death to life.
What information about Socrates does Plato's Apology contain?
The Apology dialogue book is considered a Socrates speech for his freedom during the trial. This was prepared by Plato, with literary embellishments, from facts which he remembered several years after the event. Plato was also present at the trial. It is generally understood that what is written here is what Plato may have had in mind, which is supposed to have been said by Socrates. This is a historical record. Whatever its flaws, it is enough to give a fairly accurate picture of Socrates' character.
On what charges was Socrates prosecuted?
Socrates was against the traditional Greek religion. He did reject the city's gods. Socrates was also an outspoken critic of democracy, which Athenians cherished, and he was associated with some members of the 30 Tyrants, who briefly overthrew Athens' democratic government in 403 BCE. Socrates regularly embarrassed people by making them appear ignorant and foolish. He is acting against the will of the people. Socrates also did inspire disrespect for authority among his youthful followers. But it was not his intention. Because of these facts, Socrates was widely hated in Athens. Therefore he was arguably guilty of the crimes with which he was charged, impiety and corrupting the youth.
Why didn't Socrates try to escape his death sentence?
Socrates was a wise man. Socrates could have saved himself. He was encouraged and given the chance to escape by his friend Crito, but Socrates did not want to escape. The impact of his teachings would have been greatly lessened had he escaped. His followers have carried on his messages and lessons into later times. Socrates chose to go to trial rather than enter voluntary exile. In his defense speech, he rebutted some but not all elements of the charges and famously declared that the unexamined life is not worth living. Socrates was morally obligated to stay in Athens to die. The choice was not the selfish one, but the honorable one. It could be safe to call Socrates a martyr. He laid down his life for what he considered to be right, selflessly.
Who were the accusers of Socrates?
Socrates' accusers were Meletus, Anytus, and Lycon. Meletus was a poet. Most scholars consider him to be a puppet of one of the 3 accusers, Anytus. Meletus made 2 related charges against Socrates. Those were refusing to acknowledge the gods recognized by the state and of introducing new and different gods, and corrupting the youth. Meletus' motivation in bringing charges against Socrates is a matter of considerable debate. It may have sprung either from his religious fanaticism, or it was possible that he was to some degree upset with the low opinion of Socrates for poets. According to Plato, Meletus, the youngest of the 3 accusers, has a beak, and long straight hair, and a beard which is ill-grown. Anytus was a powerful middle-class politician. He is generally considered to have been the driving force behind the prosecution of Socrates. Anytus' motivation in bringing charges against Socrates was associated with several persons viewed as responsible for the 404 overthrow of Athenian democracy. And also, he made no secret of his disdain for politicians such as Anytus. Socrates ridiculed Athenian democracy as the selection of leaders by majority vote. According to Plato, Anytus had an additional personal gripe with Socrates. Socrates had a relationship with the son of Anytus. Anytus almost certainly disapproved of his son's relationship with Socrates. Lycon. Lycon is described as an orator. It was another profession Socrates held in especially low regard. Little is known about the Lycon.
How was Socrates put to death?
Socrates' execution was delayed for 30 days due to a religious festival. His friends tried unsuccessfully to convince him to escape from Athens during this period. According to Plato, on his last day, he appeared both happy in manner and words as he died nobly and without fear. He drank the cup of brewed hemlock his executioner handed him, walked around until his legs grew numb and then lay down, surrounded by his friends, and waited for the poison to reach his heart.